Good morning, Fellowship kids. Do you love God today? Well, every day we should love God a little bit better. So how do we do that? Well, when you spend time with your friends and your family, don't you love them a little bit better? So we need to spend time in God's Word, and that lets us love God a little bit better. And this morning we're going to sing a song about loving God better every D-A-Y. So we're going to need to do some motions. Can we make a D? D-A-Y. I love him better every D-A-Y. I love him better every D-A-Y. Close by is S-I-D-E, I will a B-I-D-E. I love him better every D-A-Y. Did you all hit somebody when you were doing that? We did here. Let's try that one more time. I love him better every D-A-Y. I love him better every D-A-Y. Close by is S-I-D-E, I will a B-I-D-E. I love him better every D-A-Y. Excellent singing this morning. Now, we've been studying the life of Joseph, and we know that Joseph, he faced some scary things. In fact, we left him last week in our lesson on a camel's back, riding all the way to the new land of Egypt. Well, Joseph, he was very brave, he was strong and courageous. So we're going to sing a song this morning that you may never have heard before. So we're going to learn it together. Do you have your cards, Kaylin? Yep. And I printed up the words, so hopefully you guys will learn it a little bit easier that way. Okay, ready? We're going to start off with my cards, and the chorus is what Kaylin is holding. Moses had faith to part the sea. Daniel was brave in the lion's den. Roar! Noah was busy building the ark. They trusted in their God. When you're up against something really big, just remember what God has said. Be strong, be strong, be strong, and very courageous. Be strong, for I am always by your side. Back here. Queen Esther stood before the king. Joseph was swift and sold as a slave. David had courage to face Goliath. They trusted in their God. When you're up against something really big, just remember what God has said. Be strong, be strong, be strong, and very courageous. Be strong, for I am always by your side. Excellent singing. Now we have one final song that we're going to teach you today, and this one we're going to have to get up and get ready because we're going to go on a walk. Can you all stand up with me at home? I hope you sing along. Now it's important that we remember the one thing that was told about Joseph over and over and over. Does anybody remember what that was? That God was with Joseph, and God is with us today. So even when we do the little things in our routine every day, God is right there with us. And even if we go on a walk, God is with us. We should always walk close to God. Are you guys ready? So we're going to walk. Walking with Jesus, walking every day, all along the way, for I am walking with Jesus, walking with Jesus alone. Walking in the sunlight, walking in the shadow, walking every day, all along the way, for I am walking with Jesus, walking with Jesus alone. Now, can we jump and try to sing? Can you guys jump with us at home? You ready? Jumping with Jesus, jumping every day, all along the way, for I am jumping with Jesus, jumping with Jesus alone. We're going to go faster. Jumping in the sunlight, jumping in the shadow, jumping every day, all along the way, for I am jumping in the sunlight, jumping in the shadow, jumping with Jesus alone. If you all are out of breath like I am right now, it's a good time to sit down and get into our story today. Last week, we left off that Joseph had just been sold by his brothers to the merchants that were traveling to Egypt, and they sold him as a slave. And they put him up on the camel's back, and now they're making the long, dusty trip to Egypt. Can you imagine how scared and lonely and tired Joseph must have felt? Why did his brothers hated him so much? And why hadn't Jacob sent anybody to look for him? Well, if you remember from our story last week, Jacob thought that Joseph was dead. Do you remember the brothers returned home with Joseph's coat of many colors, and it had been dipped in goat's blood? And they handed it to their father Jacob, and Jacob instantly thought that Joseph had died. Maybe he'd been attacked by a wild animal, and he mourned for many days. But you see, Joseph's brothers lied to cover up their sin, and they might have fooled Jacob, but they didn't fool God. We can never hide our sin from God. So now Joseph is traveling into Egypt. Can you imagine the curiosity he must have had as they went into Egypt on this camel's back? As he looked around, things were not like he was used to. This was the biggest city he had ever been to. Now as he listened, he could hear people talking on the streets of Egypt, but he couldn't understand anything they said. They didn't speak the same language. That'd be very scary to me, to be in a new place that's really big, not know anybody, not know what was going to happen to me, and then not be able to understand anybody. Well, Joseph, as he looked around Egypt, he saw many things that we could still go see today in Egypt. You see, Joseph arrived in Egypt 3,800 years ago. That's 2,000 years before Jesus was even born. Egypt is a very old, ancient city. And how amazing is it that some of the things Joseph saw from that camel's back this day, we could still go see today. Now, Joseph, he saw lots of homes in Egypt. He wasn't used to seeing this many homes. He and his family, Jacob, they lived in tents. So these homes, that looked different. Now, Egyptians' homes, they were really neat. Egyptians built their homes out of mud and brick, and they loved color. So most of the walls inside their home were painted blue or yellow. They even painted their ceilings really bright and fun colors. Now, the other thing that's interesting about Egyptian homes, I think you'll find fun, is that most of them had gardens, but they also in their backyards had swimming pools. Especially the wealthy would have a swimming pool. I had no idea that ancient Egyptians had swimming pools. I bet you all would think that was fun to go swim in one of their pools. The other thing that Joseph would have seen as he traveled by the camel's back through ancient Egypt is the Sphinx. Now, the Sphinx is a giant statue. In fact, it's 240 feet long and 66 feet high. It's the oldest monument that still exists in Egypt today. Now, if you look at the Sphinx, the head of the Sphinx is human. It looks like a pharaoh, and in fact, it's probably to represent the pharaoh that lived during the time it was built. Now, the body of the Sphinx, that looks like a lion. Why would they build such a strange creature? Well, it's because Egyptians, they worshipped false gods, and they thought that the pharaoh was their connection, like deity, to the gods and to man. And they almost would worship the pharaoh. And the lion, that represents the sun. Now, the Egyptians during this time, they worshipped a god called Re, and that was the sun. And they would worship the sun. So this Sphinx is kind of like a giant idol that they would worship. Another thing that Joseph would have seen from the camel's back is the pyramids. Those 3 huge pyramids. Now, the largest of the 3 stands 480 feet tall, 750 feet wide at the base. That's a really big thing, especially in the middle of a desert with nothing else around it that was that big. Now, why were these 3 pyramids built? They were built as like burial tombs for 3 pharaohs that lived back in ancient Egypt. And the largest of them, as big as it was, had many treasures at one point buried inside. In fact, when a pharaoh died, they would be buried with lots of stuff. They'd be buried, some of them with like 50 pieces of fine clothing. Why would they need to be buried with 50 different outfits? They'd be buried with jewelry. They'd be buried with weapons and food and ointments and oils. They would also be buried with little statues of their servants. They'd be buried with chariots and boats. I even read that they buried one of the pharaohs with a toilet. That seems kind of silly, huh? And they'd also even bury them with their pet cat. Now, why would they put all of these things in the pyramids when they buried the pharaoh? Well, the ancient Egyptians, they believed in an afterlife. They thought that if you lived a really good life here on earth, that when you were buried, that you would then someday get to come back and live another life. Now, they buried all these things with the pharaohs because they believed that this afterlife, they would need all their stuff with them so they'd have a good next life. This is all false belief, and we know that's not what the Bible teaches. The Bible talks about a place called heaven and a place called hell. We learned about this in Kids Live a few weeks ago, that when we ask Jesus to come into our heart and to wash our sins away, then Jesus, because he died on the cross, he gave us a way to have eternal life in heaven. And that is exciting to me. These poor Egyptians, they didn't believe in the true and living God. In fact, Joseph, he would have also seen an obelisk. Now, an obelisk is a tall stone tower that was built as a monument. Now, many obelisks, they were built on ancient temple grounds. And this obelisk that I have here for a picture of you, it was to worship the false god at Heliopolis. It's the last surviving structure for the idol of Re. Remember I said Re was the god that the Egyptians worshipped? Basically, they worshipped the sun. Now, King Tut's tomb. Have you ever heard of that? That's something else that Joseph may have seen when he was on the back of the camel riding through Egypt. Did you know that you could drive just a few hours to Washington, D.C. and see King Tut's coffin? I can't say the other Egyptian word. You can see his coffin there in the Smithsonian Natural History Museum. How awesome is that? Now, King Tut's burial mask that they would put over his face when they buried him inside of his pyramid, it is 25 pounds. That's pretty heavy. Can you guess what it was made of? It's made of solid gold. And it also has some semi-precious stones all laid inside that gold. How beautiful is that? And expensive. It's worth $2 million today. The final thing that Joseph may have seen is the Nile River. I bet you've heard of that, especially you older kids who have gone through school a little bit. The Nile River is the longest river in the entire world. In fact, it's a little over 4,100 miles long. Now, Egyptian, they loved this Nile River, and they still rely on it today because Egypt, super hot, and it's dry. There are places in Egypt that don't get any rain at all, ever. Now, in West Virginia, that's kind of hard to imagine because we get lots of rain here, but there in Egypt, very little rain and it's dry. And so they have a hard time growing their crops. So they would use the fertile soil right next to the Nile River, and that's where they would do the best with growing their fields. Now, wheat was the best thing and the most important crop that the Egyptians grew because they ate a lot of wheat. So it'd be fun to go to Egypt. Wouldn't you want to pack your bags and travel there right now? While we think it was fun, poor Joseph, he wasn't having any fun at all. He was not knowing what his future looked like. He was on the camel's back, heading to a place that he didn't know, but God was still with him. And we're going to get back into our story right now. As we continue our story on Joseph, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 39 and chapter 40. When the merchants arrived in Egypt with Joseph, they were eager to sell him and make as much money as they could. Joseph was young and very strong, and they knew they could sell him for a very high price. It didn't take very long, and the Egyptian officer, Captain Potiphar, came along and purchased Joseph to be his slave. Now, Potiphar was very wealthy, and he already had a lot of servants and slaves. So what was he needing Joseph for? I can only imagine that as Joseph was taken back to Potiphar's house, he must have been wondering, what kind of work is Potiphar going to have me perform? Is my new master going to treat me nice and kind? Or is he going to be mean and cruel? Well, when Joseph arrived back at Potiphar's house, he found out that Potiphar wanted him to do a lot of different jobs. Back in ancient Egypt, the masters of slaves typically would train their slave to do a very good job at one specific thing. Maybe they would be taught how to cook or to care for the children. Maybe they would learn how to clean and care for the house. Maybe they would build things or serve food. But Joseph, Potiphar didn't teach him one specific task. He had him do lots of different jobs. Now, Joseph could have complained, He surely missed his family. I'm sure he wondered how his father Jacob was doing, and he missed his younger brother Benjamin, and he missed his home. And these people, they didn't even speak the same language. I'm sure Joseph was homesick, and he could have sat in the corner and barely done the work that was asked of him. But Joseph loved God, and he wanted to please God. He knew God could see him, even if his family couldn't see him, and he wanted to please his God. So he did the very best that he could. Do you always do your very best? Do you always try to please God? Joseph did. Now Potiphar, he saw what a good worker that Joseph was, and he watched him for many a day. And finally he said, "Hey Joseph, come over here. I need to talk with you." So Joseph came before Potiphar, and Potiphar said, "I have seen that the Lord is with you. I've seen that you try to please your God and that you are a good worker. I am going to put you in charge of my entire household. You will be in charge of all the other servants. You will be in charge of all my business affairs. I will let you watch over my money because I see that God is with you." Wow. Joseph had a good testimony. Other people were seeing how much he loved God. And now he wasn't just the new slave in the house. He was in charge of everything. Potiphar must have really trusted Joseph because he let him even be in charge of his money. Now, Potiphar wasn't the only one that noticed that Joseph was doing a good job. You know, the devil doesn't like it when we try to please God. He knew that Egyptians, they worshipped false gods. And now Joseph, who served the true and living God, was in Egypt. And other people were seeing that he loved his Lord and his God. Maybe, the devil thought, that other people are going to start believing in the true God too. I must do something to stop Joseph. I must ruin his reputation. And the devil came up with a plan. You know what Satan did? Satan said, "I will use Potiphar's wife to tempt Joseph to sin." And that's exactly what he did. Potiphar's wife every day would find Joseph as he went in and out of the house doing his work and tried to tempt him and get him to sin and disobey God. Now Joseph, he did his best to ignore her and to run away from the situation every day. But one day, Potiphar's wife came up to Joseph and grabbed him by the sleeve. Now Joseph, he wanted to run away, so he pulled away from her and he left the house as quickly as he could. But when he did that, his robe came off, and Potiphar's wife was standing with the robe as Joseph left the house. Now Joseph did exactly what we should do. When somebody tempts you and tries to get you to sin, you should always resist and run away. In fact, there's a verse in James 4, verse 7. It says, "Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." When the devil tries to get you to sin and disobey, you should run away, just like Joseph did. Now, Potiphar's wife, she stood there in the court holding Joseph's robe. And do you know what she did? She began to scream, "Oh, help me! Help me! Oh!" And she became hysterical and screamed to where everyone in the house heard and came running. Guards and other men came running to find out, why is our master's wife screaming so? Now, Potiphar was out of town at this time, so he wasn't home to see the commotion. But when the guards got to her, she said, "Joseph, he tempted me. He tried to get me to sin and do wrong." Oh, she lied. She said that Joseph was the one that had done wrong. But Joseph hadn't. He told her that he would obey his God and he would not fall into the sin that she had tempted him to do. But she lied. Now when Potiphar returned home, his wife continued with the lie. And she told the whole story of how Joseph had tempted her and tried to get her to do wrong. Potiphar was furious. He was so angry that he had Joseph taken up and thrown into the Pharaoh's jail. Poor Joseph. He was innocent. He had not done anything wrong. He had pleased God and obeyed God, but yet he was accused of something that he did not do. Isn't it sad to be accused when you didn't do anything wrong? That's a bad feeling. And poor Joseph, he was put into jail. Now, he could have once again gone and cried in the corner and felt sorry for himself. But you know what Joseph did? He had a good spirit. And he thought, well, God was with me in the pit. God was with me when I was sold as a slave. God was with me when I was in Potiphar's house. God is with me in the jail too, he thought. God must have a plan. He must have a reason that I'm here in the jail. And so he began to work and look for ways he could be a good helper. Sure enough, the jailer, the warden, the man who ran and oversaw the jail, he saw what a hard worker Joseph was. And it didn't take very many days before he asked Joseph to be in charge of all the prisoners. So once again, Joseph's good testimony put him in a high position where he was. So Joseph would go around the jail and he would check on the prisoners. And just a couple days later, 2 new prisoners arrived in the jail, the Pharaoh's butler and the Pharaoh's baker. So Joseph saw these 2 one day and they looked rather upset. And trying to be a good friend, he went over and asked, "What is bothering you 2?" And they both looked at Joseph and said, "We have had strange dreams, and we do not know what they mean, but they are bothering us and making us sad and worried." You know what Joseph told them? Joseph said, "My God, he understands dreams. He's the dream maker, and he will help me understand your dreams. So tell them to me." So sure enough, they began to tell Joseph the dream. Now the butler went first, and he told Joseph that he dreamt that he was holding 3 branches. And on those branches, they began to bud and produce beautiful, ripe grapes. And in his other hand, he was holding the Pharaoh's cup. So he began to say, "I took the grapes and I smashed them up and I poured this juice into the Pharaoh's cup and then I served it to him." What in the world would that mean? So Joseph said, "God has spoken to me and told me that your dream means that in 3 days you will be released from prison and put back at the same job that you were just kicked out of. You will be the butler to the Pharaoh once again." Well, the butler was overjoyed. That was wonderful news. And he was so excited he hugged Joseph, but Joseph said, "Please do me a favor. Will you remember me? When you get out of prison and you serve the Pharaoh once again, will you please say a good word for me? Tell him that I was put in prison and I'm innocent." And the butler said, "Absolutely. I will never forget what you have done for me. I will tell the Pharaoh." Well, then the baker, he said, "Joseph, I had a strange dream too. In my dream, I had 3 baskets that I was carrying on the top of my head. And in the very top basket, I had lots of bread and rolls. But birds came and kept eating all the bread and the rolls. What would that mean?" Joseph's heart was heavy. You see, God told him what this dream meant too. And he told the baker, "I am so sorry to tell you this, but in 3 days, your dream, what it means is that you are going to be taken from prison and executed. You will die." Oh, this was not happy news. And the baker was very sad. But you know, Joseph always looked for a way to please God. I'm sure that he told the baker all about God and how even if he was going to be killed, he could accept God and live in heaven with him. Now, 3 days later, everything that God told Joseph from the dreams was going to happen took place. The butler was released from prison to go back and serve the Pharaoh, and the baker was taken from prison and hung. Now, remember the promise that the butler had made Joseph, that he would tell the Pharaoh that Joseph was put in prison and he was innocent? Well, days went by, and do you think that the butler told Pharaoh? He forgot. Poor Joseph, once again he's in prison, wondering, did the butler forget about me? Month by month, time went by, and do you think that the butler remembers to tell the Pharaoh? Or do you think that Joseph stays in prison for much longer? Now remember, God was with Joseph. So what do you think is going to happen? Will you join me next Tuesday and we'll find out together. Thank you so much for joining us once again for Kids Live. I love getting together with you every single week and opening God's Word. I hope that you join me again next Tuesday.